My name is Camryn Vale. I'm 31 years old, and every morning begins the same way: black coffee, a neat low bun, and 10 quiet minutes by the kitchen window, watching a street that still feels like it doesn't know me. I live in a city of mirrored towers and office lights that outshine the stars, where days are built from back-to-back meetings and nights from strategic plans scribbled under artificial glow. I work as a senior strategist for one of the most powerful financial infrastructure firms in the country. Most people assume strategy means flashy PowerPoint decks or buzzword bingo, but the real work lives in shadows, solving chaos before it explodes, pulling tangled wires until something coherent appears. I love it. Not because it's glamorous, but because it gives me control. A sense that, for once, I can build something solid from uncertainty. My mother never saw it that way. To her, my job wasn't real work. Not like hers. My mother, Evelyn Vale, was a legend inside our company's corridors. 30 years of service. A reputation built from deadlines met and weaknesses exploited. She was efficient, decisive, and revered in the kind of way that bred both admiration and fear. Evelyn doesn't miss a thing, they'd say in hushed tones. She's surgical. That part was true. At work, she cut through problems like a scalpel. At home, she used the same blade on people. I spent most of my childhood trying to become the version of myself that wouldn't make her flinch. Honor roll, French horn, student council, clean shoes, quiet voice. The blueprint of a daughter groomed for excellence. She didn't yell, and she rarely praised. Her love came in the form of structure. Cold meals eaten quietly at 7 p.m. on the dot. Checklists pinned to the fridge. Achievement, not affection. I thought I could earn her pride. Even if I couldn't feel it, I thought I could earn it. When I turned 23, I finally had something to be proud of. A degree in business economics, top of my class, and a freshly inked internship in the corporate office, ironically, in a different branch of the very company my mother ran her empire from. I thought this was the moment she'd see me not just as her daughter, but as someone capable. Independent. Worthy. That night, I invited her over. Cleaned every inch of my apartment. Bought her favorite wine. Set 2 dinner plates with a meal I spent 2 hours cooking. She arrived exactly 4 minutes early, like always. The air was stiff. My hands shook as I served the pasta. We sat at the tiny dining table in near silence until I finally said it. "Mom, I need to tell you something." She didn't speak. Just stared. Already bracing. "I'm gay." The words left my mouth in a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. She didn't blink. Didn't flinch. But something in the room changed, like the gravity had shifted. Then she leaned back slowly, placed her wine glass down with clinical precision, and said, "You were the biggest mistake of my life." I froze. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just delivered the sentence. A verdict. Then she stood, walked to the door, and grabbed her coat. "I want you out of this place by morning." The door clicked shut before I could speak. And just like that, my mother became a stranger. That was 8 years ago. Since then, we've spoken exactly once, at a funeral, where she gave me the same nod she gave the priest. Brief. Cold. Transactional. After that night, I didn't go home. I didn't beg. I found a studio apartment with thin walls and too much noise. I scraped together rent working late nights in logistics and picked up every freelance job I could until someone noticed my mind could solve puzzles faster than most people could read them. I built myself from scratch. No safety net. No inheritance. No family. I kept my last name, Vale, but only because changing it felt like erasing the very foundation I was determined to rise above. Instead, I buried the connection deep. I never told anyone at work that Evelyn Vale was my mother. I didn't want pity. And I didn't want a shortcut. I wanted to make it on my own. And I did. The promotion came quietly, without ceremony. One day I was leading a regional strategy team. 6 months later, I was in rooms where billion-dollar decisions were made. I was delivering presentations to people who used to walk past me like I was a chair. Then, one morning, while pouring my usual 5 a.m. coffee, I opened my inbox and saw it. Subject: Retirement Announcement, Evelyn Vale. After 3 decades of exceptional leadership, Evelyn Vale will retire this July. Join us in honoring her legacy at a private farewell event. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because they used that photo, her official headshot. The same one she had hung in our living room in a gold frame. Like a portrait of a monarch. Excellence with a fixed smile. I wasn't invited to the retirement party. But I knew something she didn't. What no one knew, what not even my closest colleagues knew, was that 6 months prior, the board had begun grooming her replacement. Quietly. Strategically. And that person was me. The decision to keep my identity hidden wasn't born out of shame, it was born from necessity. In a world where perception often trumps substance, I knew being Evelyn Vale's daughter would color everything I did. I wouldn't be Camryn, the sharp strategist. I'd be Evelyn's girl. An extension. A shadow. So I became a ghost in my own story. No one at the company knew about the connection. I kept my personal life airtight. Different division, different name tag on the door, different floor. I didn't speak in casual tones about my weekends, didn't show baby photos, and never, ever, spoke about my family. I built a reputation on competence, not charisma. If I didn't know the answer, I found it. If there was a gap, I filled it. My calendar was always full. My reports were always early. And somewhere along the way, people began to notice. I started getting pulled into closed-door meetings, the kind where words like succession, long-term strategy, and next-gen leadership were whispered in calm, careful tones. I became the one people looked to when things felt uncertain. It was strange, standing in the same building where my mother ruled with icy precision, but never once crossing paths. We operated in the same orbit, yet remained distant planets. Then came the day I was asked to stay after a quarterly review. The meeting room emptied, leaving me and the CFO, Julian, silver-haired, always 2 steps ahead, alone with silence. He closed the door gently, then turned to me. "Camryn," he said. "How do you feel about legacy?" I blinked. "I'm not sure I follow." "That's good," he said, smiling. "People who chase legacy tend to trip over their own egos." It was the beginning of something. A test, perhaps. A whisper of the door I'd spent a lifetime pressing my ear against. In the months that followed, I was brought into confidential strategy pivots. Leadership restructuring. Internal performance audits. All handled in whispers and silence, the language I knew best. I never pushed. Never asked for a title. But I made sure they could count on me. Eventually, the board called me in. Not to ask, but to offer. The role, CEO of East Coast Operations. My mother's successor. I said yes. But I told no one. Not my team. Not my assistant. Not even Ray, my closest confidant in the company. I signed the NDA. I nodded through meetings as if the air around me hadn't changed. I sat through briefings, coffee chats, exit reviews. I watched speculation swirl in the background, about who might take over Evelyn's chair. Some guessed a VP from overseas. Others assumed the current COO was being groomed. No one guessed me. That was the gift of silence. It made you invisible, until it didn't. Then, a month before the retirement party, something strange happened. My phone rang. A number I hadn't seen in almost 8 years. Vale. I let it ring. She didn't leave a voicemail. 3 days later, I received a message. Cold. Impersonal. Exactly like her. "Heard you're still at the company. Don't make the party awkward." No hello. No how are you? No congratulations, even though she clearly knew something was coming. Just a warning. A reminder that she was still the gatekeeper of dignity, and I was the risk she never wanted to claim. I didn't reply. But that night, I laid awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Not from fear. But from a strange, old ache. The kind that wraps itself around your ribs like it remembers where you hurt the most. After everything, after the silence, the success, the sleepless nights, I still felt the sting of her disapproval like it was fresh. She hadn't changed. And maybe I hadn't either. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want applause. I just wanted one thing. Acknowledgement. Not for the title. Not even for the success. But for surviving. For planting something beautiful in the very ground she left me to rot in. The weeks flew by. My official promotion remained under wraps. But the pressure began to mount. Whispers intensified. My colleagues started looking at me differently. Some speculated. Others stared longer in meetings, like they were starting to see the shape of something they'd missed. Still, I said nothing. The night before the retirement event, I received a call from Julian, the CFO. "We're printing the name cards," he said. "Are you still okay with being announced tomorrow?" "I am," I said softly. "She doesn't know, does she?" "No," I said. "And I'd like to keep it that way." A pause. "You sure?" I looked out at the city skyline from my apartment window. Buildings glowing like a constellation of muted truths. "She'll know when everyone else does." There was a chuckle on the line. "You really are made for this role." I smiled. But it didn't quite reach my eyes. Because I hadn't done any of this to be perfect. I'd done it to be free. The morning of the party, I woke before sunrise. The sky was a deep, moody blue, hinting at spring but still carrying winter's edge. I made coffee, the smell grounding me. I didn't rehearse a speech. Didn't practice my smile. I wasn't performing. I was arriving. In my closet hung the same navy blue suit I wore to my first investor presentation. Clean lines, sharp collar, no embellishment. I packed a small notebook and my badge. No fanfare. No script. Just presence. The event hall sat on the 41st floor of our headquarters, a place with wraparound glass and skyline views that made even bad coffee taste expensive. That morning, it had been transformed. White tulip centerpieces lined the tables, linen napkins folded into angular shapes, soft jazz hummed from hidden speakers. The place glowed with polished legacy. It felt more like a coronation than a farewell. I arrived precisely 15 minutes early. Not because I was eager. Because I needed to see the room empty. I wanted to walk the perimeter while it was still quiet, when I was just another woman in a navy blue suit standing near a window, before the attention shifted, before the curtain lifted. I scanned the reserved seats. There it was. Camryn Vale. No title. No hint. Just black text on thick white cardstock. Perfect? I kept my distance as the room began to fill. Executives, department heads, interns clutching champagne glasses too tightly. I nodded politely when acknowledged but mostly hovered like a shadow, known to most, understood by few. And then she walked in. Evelyn Vale. Perfect posture. Silver necklace. Slate gray dress tailored to the millimeter. Her stride cut through the crowd like a scalpel. She shook hands like a diplomat, accepted compliments like a monarch. That same practiced smile, thin, precise, detached. She looked exactly as she had always been, polished, powerful, unyielding. And then our eyes met. A flicker, nothing more. She didn't blink. No tilt of the head. No widening of the eyes. Not even a flicker of recognition. She looked at me the way she looked at interns. The way she looked at anyone who didn't matter. Good, I thought. Let the reveal be clean. Around noon, the speeches began. A few senior VPs took the stage first, their words predictable and polite. They recounted Evelyn's legendary attention to detail, her unmatched efficiency, the time she caught a $20 million error on a contract draft moments before it went out. There were laughs, applause, even a few heartfelt nods. Then the COO stepped forward, Julian. His presence was calm, fatherly, disarming by design. He smiled warmly and glanced at Evelyn. "We've talked a lot today about legacy," he said, "and about how much of this company bears Evelyn's fingerprints. The systems she built, the people she mentored, the standards she set." More applause. "But what's more important than legacy," he continued, "is what happens next. Who carries it forward? Who leads with not only strength, but clarity, empathy, and vision?" The room shifted. Something subtle. A collective leaning in. He turned to the crowd, and then to me. "And so," he said, "it's my honor to introduce the new CEO of East Coast Operations. Please welcome Camryn Vale." There it was. The name. My name. I stood. The applause was immediate, though tentative, surprised clapping, murmurs weaving between hand claps. Heads turned. A few gasps. And then a sharper silence. I walked calmly to the stage. Julian handed me the mic with a proud smile and stepped aside. From the corner of my eye, I saw her. My mother. Evelyn Vale. She looked disoriented. Her eyes fixed on me like I was a glitch in her carefully coded matrix. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. The color had drained from her face, not in rage, not in shame, but in shock. She hadn't seen it coming. That was the point. I stood at the podium for a moment before speaking. Not to enjoy the silence, but to honor it. The silence I'd endured for 8 years. The silence that carried me through every lonely night, every glass-walled meeting where I was spoken over, every phone call she never made. Then I spoke, quietly. "Thank you. It's an honor." And that was all. No long speech. No declarations. Just presence. Because sometimes, presence is the loudest thing you can offer. I handed the mic back to Julian, nodded respectfully, and walked back to my seat. Behind me, a storm was beginning to swirl, questions, connections, whispers. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I stayed for the cake cutting. Smiled at a few people. Accepted congratulations with grace, but kept my answers short. Not because I wasn't proud. But because I didn't need to fill the space. The space was already full, with meaning, with shock, with realization. Then, without fanfare, I quietly excused myself. The hallway outside the event room was dimmer. Empty. My heels echoed softly against the marble floor. I pressed the elevator button, exhaled slowly. I hadn't flinched. I hadn't raised my voice. And I hadn't sought revenge. But I had let the moment speak for itself. And it had. Later that evening, as I sat in my apartment with a glass of water in hand, my phone buzzed. Vale. I stared at the screen. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. I didn't answer. On the 4th attempt, she gave up on calling and began texting. "Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't respond. A minute later. "You stood on that stage and said nothing. After everything." Another pause. "Did you plan this to humiliate me?" I placed the phone face down on the table. She wasn't angry about the job. She was angry that she hadn't controlled the narrative. That I hadn't given her time to spin the story, one where she passed the baton gracefully to a worthy candidate she'd mentored. But that wasn't the truth. And I was done performing for lies. The next text didn't ask. It commanded. "Lunch. Tomorrow. 1 p.m. Delancey and Maine. No, would you like to?" No question mark. Just coordinates and expectation, as if nothing had changed. As if I was still the girl she could summon with a single line of text. I stared at it for a long time. And then I went. Not for her. For me. I needed to see her in daylight. Without the ceremony, without the suits and smiles and staged applause. I needed to know what she'd say when there was no microphone, no audience, no legacy to perform for. Delancey and Maine was the kind of place that hadn't changed in 30 years, faded brick, white tile floors, a rotating chalkboard menu. It was the same cafe she used to take me to after parent-teacher conferences. Back when I still thought her silence meant approval. I arrived early. She was already there. Of course. She sat in the far corner, back straight, blazer pressed, reading the menu like it held national secrets. She didn't look up as I approached, just gestured to the seat across from her. "Camryn," she said, calm and clipped. "Evelyn," I replied. Her lips tightened at the use of her first name, but she said nothing. The silence stretched between us, decades old, yet sharper than ever. Finally, she set the menu down. "You could have told me. I didn't think you'd care," I replied, tone steady. "I would have preferred not to be blindsided," she said. "That announcement. It wasn't just unprofessional. It was calculated." "You're wrong," I said, voice low. "It wasn't calculated. It was contained. There's a difference." She frowned. I wasn't prepared. And there it was, the truth. Not "I'm proud of you." Not "you earned it." Not even congratulations. Just disapproval wrapped in disappointment. "You needed to prepare," I said quietly. "I just needed to show up." She looked at me for a long time, eyes scanning my face like she was seeing it for the first time. She didn't recognize me, not because I'd changed, but because she'd never really looked. "You've changed," she said finally. "No," I said. "You never saw who I was." There was a flicker then. A tiny tremble at the corner of her mouth. Regret? Doubt? I couldn't tell. Evelyn Vale was a master of containing things. "I said a lot of things I didn't mean," she said. "You said I was the biggest mistake of your life." I was angry. Shocked. "You were embarrassed," I corrected. "Not by me. By what I meant for your image." Her gaze dropped for the first time. "You could have called," she whispered. "So could you." Silence. I let it sit there. Let it sting. Let it say everything we hadn't. "I wasn't asking for an apology," I added. "I was asking for space. You gave me exile." Evelyn straightened. "I built a reputation from nothing. I didn't have room to love your daughter?" I cut in. She flinched. The mask cracked for just a second. But then she reset. "You think you got there on your own?" "Yes," I said. "And I'm proud of that." She blinked. That stung more than anything else. "I didn't come here to fight," I continued. "I came because I needed to hear whatever it is you've been waiting 8 years to say." She stared out the window for a long moment. Then, barely above a whisper, "I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. That you'd come back different. More manageable." I nodded slowly. "That's what I always was to you," I said. "Something to manage. A risk to mitigate. Not a person." She didn't deny it. There it was. The clearest confession I'd ever get. The check came. Neither of us touched it. I stood, pulled my coat on. As I reached the door, she said, "You surprised me." I paused. Hand on the door. "I wasn't trying to," I said. "I just stopped waiting for you to see me." And I walked out. No tears. No dramatic exits. No final hug or whispered redemption. Just the soft jingle of the cafe door and the feeling of something heavy sliding off my shoulders. That night, I didn't check my phone. I didn't write a journal entry. I just sat on my balcony, watching the skyline. Lights flickering like a Morse code of lives being lived. Somewhere in one of those windows, I imagined Evelyn doing the same, sitting in silence, wondering how she'd lost control of a story she thought she authored. But she didn't. Not anymore. When I returned to the office Monday, it was different. Subtly. Not in the layout. Not in the hallway buzz. But in how people looked at me. Not as Evelyn's daughter. Not even as the new CEO. But as someone seen. Not all of them knew the full story. Most never would. But some did. And that was enough. The title on my door changed overnight. Camryn Vale, CEO, East Coast Operations. It was embossed in silver, centered perfectly on the frosted glass. Clean, minimal, like I preferred. But still, for a moment, I just stood there, staring at it, as if waiting for the imposter in me to speak up and call it a mistake. She never did. Because she was gone. In her place stood someone who had endured silence and rejection, rebuilt from the ashes of shame, and walked into a room where she was never meant to be invited. Not because she forced the door open, but because she had outgrown the lock. Inside, the office Evelyn once ruled was now mine. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, powdered, precise, like authority and winter wind. The furniture had been left untouched, a mahogany desk too large for comfort, a leather chair that creaked when leaned back. I didn't change any of it, yet. I wanted to feel the weight of what I'd inherited before I decided what to keep. But there was one thing I changed immediately: the tone. My first leadership move wasn't bold, wasn't headline-worthy. It was simple. I cancelled the top-down Monday briefings. Instead, I scheduled a 9 a.m. open roundtable, no slides, no scripts. Just questions. Dialogue. I walked into the room that Monday morning, coffee in hand, and said, "You don't work for me. We work together. Let's start there." Some were skeptical. Conditioned by years of sharp eyes and harsher silence, they braced for hidden motives. But slowly, they softened. They began to speak, not just with rehearsed metrics, but with honesty. What wasn't working? What needed change? What they feared? What they hoped? I listened. And the culture shifted. Not overnight. But steadily. One boundary at a time. About 3 weeks in, HR sent me a folder, Evelyn's exit interview debrief. It was protocol. Departing executives left notes for succession planning. Most CEOs skimmed it. I read every word. It was brief. Cold. But one line caught my eye. "My only concern is that Camryn may lack the emotional discipline to lead at scale. She's sharp, but she wears her history like armor. It limits her." I closed the folder and leaned back in the chair she once called hers. She was still trying to write my story. Even in her absence. Still framing me as flawed, controlled, but ultimately constrained by emotion. What she never understood was that empathy isn't weakness. It's the strongest foundation there is. And history? It's not armor. It's blueprint. I didn't respond to the comment. Not in writing. Not in conversation. Instead, I focused on building something new. I met with every department head. Asked not just for metrics, but for feelings. Burnout. Balance. Pride. Fear. The things Evelyn never made space for. And something unexpected happened. People thanked me. Not for raises. Not for power. But for listening. For remembering they were human. For the first time, the company began to breathe. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived at my apartment. No return address. Neat handwriting. Inside was a photo. One I hadn't seen in years. Graduation day. Me in my cap and gown. Evelyn beside me. Hand on my shoulder. A rare, slight smile on her lips. On the back, a single sentence in her handwriting. "I thought this was who you were." I stared at the photo for a long time. Not with anger. But with clarity. She still didn't understand. That version of me, the one standing still, smiling, trying to belong, wasn't the full picture. She was only the beginning. A version shaped by expectation. Posed beside someone who only showed affection when the camera was watching. I didn't cry. I didn't call. Instead, I tucked the photo into the back of a drawer in my desk. Not because I wanted to forget it. But because it didn't belong on display. It belonged in the archive. The story had moved on. One Saturday, I took the train to a small town an hour outside the city. Just me, a notebook, and the sea. I walked the boardwalk. Let the wind tangle my hair. Watched waves crash against the rocks like old anger being rewritten into something softer. And that evening, in a seaside cafe, I wrote a letter I didn't plan to send. "Mom. You once told me I was your biggest mistake. And for years, I believed you. I let that sentence define how I worked, how I walked, how I loved. I wanted to prove you wrong so badly that I forgot to ask whether I ever needed to. But I know now, I wasn't your mistake. I was your mirror. And maybe that's what scared you. I don't hate you. I just can't carry your silence anymore. I've built a life. A good one. One you never asked about, but one I'm proud of. And I hope, someday, you realize I didn't need to embarrass you to be seen. I just needed to stop apologizing for existing. Camryn. I folded it. Slipped it into my notebook. Sometimes, closure isn't a conversation. It's a decision. On Monday, I returned to work like I always did. Coffee in hand. Calendar full. Hair tied back. But for the first time, I didn't walk in as a survivor. I walked in as someone whole. That Friday, a junior strategist stopped me near the elevators. She looked like I did, once, eager, careful, questioning everything. "Ms. Vale," she asked, "how did you get here?" I smiled. One boundary at a time. She didn't fully understand. Not yet. But she would. Before I left that evening, I changed the plaque outside my office. It no longer said just CEO. It now read: Camryn Vale, Chief Executive Officer, East Coast Division. Built, not inherited. I stood there for a moment. Not to admire it, but to honor it. It was mine now. And always would be. That night, I walked home. The city lights flickered above me like soft constellations. A breeze carried the scent of possibility, not fear. I didn't rush. I didn't brace. I just walked. Free. Because I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was walking in my own name,